So why don't we start off by maybe telling me a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in this space?
I'm kind of an anomaly. I'm not a technologist.
Yeah.
I grew up in a ranch in western Colorado, and then went to school in Boston and got an accounting degree, and then went to Stanford Business School. And I wanted to work with small companies, so I was fortunate. I graduated from Stanford Business School and got a job with a venture capital firm kind of right out of the back. And there were two of us that did that from my class of business school. And what I really wanted to do is work with entrepreneurs and small companies. And when I first got into the business, it was a $500,000 investment, a club, and we backed all kinds of different companies. So, one of my first companies was a company in the biosystems, and then I did a cable TV company investment. Then I lost some money successfully at Osborne Computer, one of the first portable computer companies. And so, there was no specialization. It was all general. I bought a company in the billboard business in Birmingham, Alabama, with some people. And then what happened is the industry became more specialized. And I started spending more time on, I did technology in the firm I was with before, Cardnal, was kind of technology, software, companies like Informatica, Business Objects, communications companies, and then I kind of led and did much of the healthcare investments. And with, so a couple things happened. One, the whole life science area became very popular, and one of my partners, our firm, does invest in life sciences and healthcare IT or technology-enabled services. That's all we do. And one of my partners, John Clark, has had phenomenal success in investing in the life science area. But what I found is that the complexity of the companies and how much money it takes to be successful in the space was not ideal for me. So I really focused on how do I leverage my prior background in software and technology, and looked at technology-enabled services or processors in the healthcare space. And I made an investment early on, a company called Medicode that became the platform for Ingenix. We sold the company to Ingenix, which is now Optum, the United Healthcare big software. And so I did a series of investments. We did an investment called VisiQ, which I mentioned previously, which was some technology that was developed at Hopkins, and two intensivists kind of developed a remote monitoring capability and showed that they could very successfully manage high acuity ICU patients, much better with great outcomes. And so we put money with them. And so it was kind of gradually over time, I've started seeking kind of investments in the healthcare IT space. And in fact, in 2000, everybody kind of said we hate that space, and we were one of the few firms that's made money. We started Athena Health. One of my partners, Brandon Hull's still on the board. And that company has gone from kind of startup to being $3 billion in market cap.
Now, Athena Health, is that the company that's like the market space?
It's a company, Jonathan Bush is the CEO. It's a SaaS model for physicians. So it's like a Practice Fusion, but focused on small group practices, but they now have an enterprise solution. But it's a SaaS model. So Jonathan Bush is interesting. He started a company in women's health, and it was down in Southern California. It was really a birthing center and a women's health center. And what he found is it was very hard to collect the claims. And so he and Todd Park got together and kind of developed a software to say, how do we find out all the rejected claims, and how do we come up with a system that we can kind of real time correct the claims to get paid, because the insurance companies kept paying. And so they developed a SaaS model. And the concept is, if I can put in a standard set of rules on the SaaS model and somebody changes it, I can make one change and then overnight the software is automatically current, right? So unlike the Epics and everybody else selling software where, it'll be in our next version of software, he kind of looked at real time, how do I help the doctor. And so his goal was to say, I can help you collect cash. And so he has a data processing approach. And he gets paid a fee, some percentage of revenues. And he was half the cost of the other people providing the service. And he said, I'll get it paid, and you can send me your bills, or you can send me faxes or checks, and I'll process that. And so that's kind of, what he was trying to do is take all the mundane hassles out of the collection process for doctors to make it more efficient. And so what was compelling, which ties to kind of your first question, is that he came up with an elegant solution that was half the price, that really saved doctors a lot of money and was very compelling. And what he kind of says is, I'll take all your back office crap, and you can spend more time with your patients, or you can cut Susie out of the front office. You can do all those things, and we'll be much more efficient. And for a physician, Medicare, Medicaid changes and everything, reimbursement, they have a team of 1,500 programmers in India. They have 700 people in Maine that, take into account that, and some doctor calls up and says, I got a claim rejected. What happened? They investigate and can put that rules in, and then everybody benefits. So you have a low-cost solution, the cost to fix it, and kind of continuing to have a current software platform is unique. So it's a long story, but I liked working with small companies, and I think what I found in some of the healthcare companies we had is as you said, they're antiquated. Yeah. But by having some simple solutions and building some companies like VisiQ, I believe you can have really impact the human condition, which is kind of what's fun about investing in healthcare versus other space.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find very interesting about the healthcare IT space, is that there's a lot of different types of IT that are out there. But for the most part, they say that, it's supposed to save you time, but I've worked a long time, and very rarely does anything that says it saves me time actually save me time. Like the smartphone is supposed to save you time, but I wind up working till late at night, and even in the middle of the night, I'll still hear the thing going off. So that really doesn't save me time. But with the healthcare space, that's one of the few things I see that it has the ability to be able to really help people.
Well, and I think we prefaced in our prior discussion, but with more people coming into the system, they're more ill. And then you're talking about physicians, but physician populations are going to start going down. The baby boomer doctors are going to start retiring. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about that, we haven't changed any of our training, and we're not taking a lot of foreign doctors today.
Right.
So things are going to get compounded, and so unless you use technology-enabled tools, we're not going to be able to deliver the care, which is the great opportunity, because as you articulated earlier, we've seen significant inroads in other sectors in technology, and so now is the time for healthcare.
Yeah. Like I wrote a book a while back called "Marketing Your Medical Practice in the Digital Age," and I wrote I wrote it in 2009, so that's a couple of years ago. And at that time, it was a hard sell. You go and start talking to doctors and clinics and saying you need to go and start marketing your practice a lot differently than what you are now. And they're like, no, this is the way it's always been done. Because up until just a couple of years ago, everything was all done the same way it's been done for thousands of years. Yeah. And that goes with marketing. That goes with how they were doing their medical records. Back in the 90s, I worked a lot with document imaging.
Yeah.
And we were taking physical forms and scanning them in. Yeah. And that's the technology that I worked on. So it was still whole physical forms even at that time. Yeah. Now everything is all electronic.
Yeah, no, it's interesting as you say that. Humana, I think now Humana is one of the largest employers of docs in the country. Mm-hmm. You've seen Aetna, as you know, from Bertolini, has kind of changed the way they're doing business. It's really a healthcare service company attached to an insurance company. Aetna. So, this is a unique time, so it's going to be exciting with all the changes and shifts. I've never seen in my 30 years of venture capital, I've never seen a window of opportunity like this in healthcare.
Yeah, there's a huge amount of opportunity right now.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with the FDA.
Yeah.
Because right now they're talking about regulating a lot of these things through the FDA.
Yeah.
And my question is the FDA equipped to be able to analyze technology properly?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's an overlap. We're seeing a combination, and in the device world, it's very difficult. But a lot of the devices now are Zigbee enabled, so you're having an infusion pump. We have a company, FluidNet, which is an infusion pump, brand new technology, but they're enabled with Zigbee, so you know where they are and who's at the pump. And so there's a fine line now. Infusion pumps are regulated by definition on kind of, how is it, administer the fluids and different quality metrics and those things. But now to say, okay, that's software to locate where it is in the building, if that has to be FDA reviewed, it's going to be a bigger challenge, I think.
Yeah, and I just hope it doesn't stomp on innovation.
Yeah. Well, I think in the device world, it's clearly killed it. And what it means is the entrenched incumbents don't have to innovate and can keep new people out. I think the FDA is one issue. I think the other issue is Medicare, CMS and reimbursement, which we talked about earlier. That's going to be a real impediment for a lot of device companies, because if you can't get reimbursed, the government's 50% of all dollars, it's going to make it very hard to build a company in the space. So you take a medical device company where you're spending more money to get through the regulatory environment, you have less chance of reimbursement, and there's an oligopoly of potential buyers. The economics don't work for a venture capitalist.
Yeah, and with doctors, I mean, there's so much, I mentioned my book, Marketing and Medical Practice in the Digital Age. Doctors don't get paid for reading Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, email, any of those things. They don't get reimbursed for any of that. So, and these are all communication mediums now.
Yeah. We're finding some insurance companies are reimbursing for telemedicine applications. So we have a company, Teladoc.
Yeah.
And at Teladoc, in certain states, we have large employers as big customers, but we also have large insurance companies, and they're willing to pay to help us manage some of their populations. So a doctor, if you're in the Teladoc physician, you can get reimbursed for some time. But we have our own employee doctors, or subcontracted our own group, because we want to make sure there's quality.
So when it comes to a good investment in the healthcare space, what is it that you look for?
So it continues to evolve. But I think as a venture capitalist, I think we, in technology-enabled services or healthcare IT, I think we have 4 parameters we look at. The first is kind of really looking at the market and who the customer is. So we spend a lot of time talking to either the hospitals, physicians, insurance companies to say, is this a solution that needs to be solved? And one of the criteria, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of saying, who's willing to pay for it, and why is it compelling? What is the ROI? And so I think that's the first criteria I look at, is kind of the market opportunity and what is unique about this product or feature. What we find is in healthcare IT, there's lots of products, but few companies, which ties into yours. Very interesting technology, but is this really a company? So that's the first screen we use. The second screen we use is kind of the management team and their expertise. Have they sold, or do they know the market they're trying to approach? And we find many great software programmers from Apple, but they don't know how to sell, to your example before, doctors. So we really want to focus on do they have experience selling to that customer, or expertise that'll give them an unfair advantage, and which is kind of a critical side. The third is we look at who is paying for the product. If you're selling to a hospital, what is the decision-making process? Most people underestimate the time it takes to sell to hospitals or healthcare, doctors and stuff. And so we spend a lot of time trying to understand who the specific customer is in the organization and what is their spending power and authority to engage. And so we typically focus on people that aren't wearing ties, that are kind of departmental people, that it's a quick decision process. If you're selling an Epic system, it takes several years and millions of dollars of marketing. We don't want to be in that space. And then the fourth criteria we look at is how capital efficient is the model. How much money is it going to take to launch a product, sell, and build the business? And we're very focused on that because of the long sales cycle. You want to make sure that you have adequate resources and you manage your burn rate very well, so you can, when you succeed, you're there. And so sales cycles are so long. So that ties to point 3, sales cycle relative to how long is the sales cycle and who's the buyer and what is their authority to pay. So those are kind of the first kind of 4 criteria, market, team, economic value, and kind of or customer value, and then sales cycle. The last thing that we spend a bunch of time on as well is the competitive matrix. How differentiated, what's your unfair advantage, your secret sauce. And that's the hardest thing to do in our space. Is you and I talked about earlier, analytic companies. There's hundreds of analytic companies.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate? What do you do? What is your secret sauce? And so if you're an analytics company that spun out from partners and they're a customer and they're helping you sell to other hospitals in Boston, that's an unfair advantage. And so that's probably where we spend time as well.
Okay. So where do you see the future of healthcare technology going? What do you see like the big things that are kind of maybe coming up that I don't want to disclose anything that you don't want to disclose, but
so I think there's 3. We're spending time strategically looking at 5 areas where we're looking at kind of what is happening with the providers, the large hospitals and the payers, and this alignment, who's taking risk. One of the areas we're spending a lot of time is looking at the patient not as a patient but as a consumer. And I'll explain a company there. We have a company, Vitals.
Yeah.
And Vitals is a company that's developed tools to optimize search on Google and their own independent to find a doctor or physician. And they have 12 million queries a month trying to people find a doctor. And you can go to vitals.com and it'll tell you who's there. And that's really interesting, but what's more interesting is hospitals and plans like Highmark, which owns a hospital and an insurance plan, are trying to figure out how do they narrow their network. So by using someone like Vitals as a physician registry and then kind of denoting if they're in network or not in the network helps funnel patients to be more cost effective, as we talked about with the higher deductible plans, is critical. And so at Vitals, they also have Yelp ratings. So it's the first time in healthcare where you can measure quality and cost. So I need a knee replacement. I can go on the website and identify myself as an Aetna customer. I will soon have the ability to say, here's New York Hospital for Special Surgery. Here's the doctor who's the Jets doctor, ABC, and he's ranked 5-star. and he's not in my network and it costs me $5,000. Or I can go to Hoboken and there's Dr. Y who's 4.5 star or 5 star as well, and our ratings are consumer, but also where they went to medical school. There's a whole objective, subjective kind of analysis to do that. And in Aetna, my deductible's $500. And I can also look on that criteria, and he's done 10,000 knee replacements. The Jets guy has done 5. So I think that's a really interesting area, and we're spending a lot of time on that. And then the third area, or kind of that we're spending probably time on is workflow. How do we track people and assets in hospitals? We have a company, AwarePoint, that does that. Life Image is one. And then lastly is we started our conversation, we're looking at kind of analytics. And analytics in this space is kind of very interesting, kind of saying, how do you take the data, as you see, and then there's the information, but how do you make it actionable, and kind of the knowledge and then wisdom, how does that iterate? And so, you're seeing people talk about business intelligence, big data, and decision support. What we're trying to do is focus on, okay, what are the compelling issues? Like we just funded a company called Cupid, which is software that was developed at Partners in Boston. And what they were able to do, a radiology department kind of developed the application, is they were finding out that they could not identify whether a person had a pacemaker or some reason that they couldn't have an MRI. And they were finding 15 or 20% of the people that came in, had appointments scheduled, couldn't have the MRI because of a pre-existing condition. So they developed some natural language processing that can look at the EMR, but then also look in the physician notes on unstructured data to say pacemaker X, and I'll highlight that to avoid having that person come in and have utilization problems. So that's just a specific example of a startup we did out of Partners that we think with natural language processing you'll be able to really impact quality as well as delivery of care and reduce costs. We've spent some time with a series of other companies in the space. So our focus, and that's where an entrepreneur should look at our website or look at any prospective investor's website, is if you look at the deals they're doing, we're very systematic. We kind of look at areas we want to go on, and then we go in depth and kind of really look at those projects. And so for us, we've worked with, we've probably looked at 60 analytics companies. And so when somebody's querying and trying to find out if it's the right fit of a venture firm, by looking at the portfolio, you get a sense of what they're doing. But moreover is them kind of saying, what are the areas you're interested in? We're not going to do another EMR company. There's 100 as we were in Athena.
Yeah.
So we're looking at what's ahead of the wave of change. So those are the kind of 4 areas that we're spending time on today. And you evolve, as you see the opportunities. A little long-winded.
No. It's a lot of great information. So so you mentioned a couple of times analytics. Are you looking at more like just search analytics or business intelligence, or?
I'd say it's more business intelligence. It's a little bit more, we're seeing a lot of people have developed their data marts or data warehouses. Yeah. But what we're looking at, for example, in Cupid is saying, okay, how do you make that actionable? So by using a natural language processor where you can kind of, on a real-time basis, get some data that is actionable to say, that person shouldn't come in and be scheduled for an MRI, it's great. Now, how we kind of then further enhance that and say, okay, now we've done as I mentioned before, we're looking at population health. So then how do you extrapolate and say, okay, here we have a population, how do we sort that population to then figure out how you can deliver care and kind of look at outliers. And as we all know in healthcare, in the healthcare system today, it's a small percentage of the population uses most of the resources. And so how can you impact that? And there was a wave of kind of disease management companies. They really failed. And so we think population health now, as you start kind of looking at what they're doing, and with high deductible plans, how do you push people into treatment regimens that are a win-win? Mm-hmm. So we think there's a lot of opportunities in kind of not selling necessarily the engine, but trying to develop the tools to monitor quality and affect the care.
Yeah. Now with business intelligence, one thing I've been seeing a lot is, because I've asked this question a couple of times to people who are developing all this great technology, and I see all like you can take heart, the regulation of the heart, the heartbeats, yep, and all of that, and you can put that onto an iPhone, and you can just go and touch two little sensors, yep, and it automatically does an EKG reading. And you could take this every 5 minutes if you wanted to, or you can have a wearable device and it's constant. And then my question to them was, who's going to analyze all this data? Yeah. All right, and that's my big question. Who's going to analyze all this data, and then how are you going to make predictions of somebody's health or and diagnosis and things like that, all based on this information? How is that going to be done?
So I think that's a very good question. I mean, I think what you're seeing is some of the large software vendors like Cerner are working and have developed some population analytics. And since they have all the EMR data, mm-hmm, they think they can process that and evaluate that and make some terms. If you're looking at HCA, the big large hospital group, their challenge is, I don't know how many petabytes of data they have with all their hospitals. So, we saw an analytics company that said, we'll take all your data, we'll process it and send it back in a report. It's very unlikely a startup or any small company could do that. One, because people aren't going to let their data go outside the firewall. Two, how do you process all this data on a real-time basis is, mm-hmm, very difficult. The third challenge is, how do you make it actionable then to the doctor? So if you're at HCA, how do you have that head of that hospital go talk to the head of cardiology to change a practice? So it's, mm-hmm, so it's more than just data. You have to be able to affect workflow.
Right.
And so I think that's what you're going to see is some of the larger hospital organizations are probably going to use consultants to help them, but they're going to get the data, and then how do you change workflow is kind of what I think the solution is going to be. It's not, here's a report, go do it.
Right, and that was usually been my question like I saw a great piece of technology. I think it came out of a company that's working out of NASA down in Ames. And they had all these great data points, and I asked them, well, who's going to analyze all of this data points? And he told me the future of doctors will just be analyzing data, and they won't have to talk to patients anymore. I was like, every doctor I say that to, they're like, did they ever ask us? Yeah. Because doctors want to meet with patients. They don't want to be analyzing data.
And I think most doctors wanted to work with patients, or they do it. And so I think it's a fine line on how do you develop a tool. That said, the one trend line which Bertolini mentioned at the Stanford Health Conference is the number of practices being owned by institutions, whether it's caregivers, insurance companies, or hospitals, are going from 20-some% to 75%. And soon those doctors are not going to be able to know. So I think doctors are going to have less control over their lives, but the institutions are all bearing risk. So I think there's going to be a dynamic shift. So there's probably going to be more doctors. I think what you're going to see is the institutional owners of physician practices are going to be able to take this data and say, you're an outlier. That normally we do 2 x-rays for this kind of patient, or we think about another treatment thing. So I think there's an opportunity to improve quality of care and cost as we have this data. And I think the people who are going to process the data are going to be the providers, whoever the doctors are now working for. And I think the pressure of a doctor today and the solo doctor, trying to run an office and keep people, mm-hmm, they're all giving up, And so I think you're seeing a big transition, or they're saying, pay me, concierge medicine. So I do think there's an opportunity that the providers are going to process this data and look at care. One of the problems I see in healthcare is people don't look at episodal care. They look at an event because, as you said, it's a reimbursement per event.
Yeah.
Where if you have a young child that has gone to the doctor 6 times for an ear infection, you're not going to see that unless you look at episodal care and kind of look at that. So, the insurance company or the hospital or someone could look and say, wait a minute, we've seen this thing, it's every 6 weeks, they see a different doctor, what do we do? So I think it's going to be a challenge, but I think we'll be able to process the data. So if we look at episodal care, you'll be able to really impact it and say, you've seen 100 pediatric ear infections, and your data is this, and your contemporaries at Hopkins and at Stanford are Y.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's going to change.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Is there anything else you would like? I know you have to get to it.
Yeah. No. You can call me as you have other questions. I'm happy to answer. I think the biggest challenge for startups in the healthcare space is understanding the time it takes to really start a company is enormous, and that I would suggest they pre-identify the customer and have a customer. So as I look at funding startups, and if I was going to do a startup myself, I think you have to go and find a customer with a need and solve that problem, do that bootstrapping, and kind of really think about that. And to get funded, because a venture capitalist would love to say, okay, great, it's an interesting market, come back and show me. And we typically don't want to pay for software development in healthcare IT, and there's very few people who want to do that. What we'd like to do is see a working prototype with a customer. So to the extent you can get a hospital or some payer or provider to help fund the development of your product and be a customer, you increase the probability of getting financed multiple. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is, as a VC, I'd like to say, okay, here's the product, does it work, as we talked about kind of the solution, and here's the customer, and you can tell me that El Camino is paying for this, they helped develop that, and they're willing to pay $100,000 a year for this solution. That is very compelling for me to then be able to introduce, the group to Stanford to see if they're willing to pay, and you can do the due diligence and get funded. A group that comes to me and says, we think there's a great idea, and we think El Camino has, this problem, and we want a solution. I think it's very hard to say, okay, great, here's my money, I'm going to do it, because there's so many hospitals and so many groups and so much competition. And so that's the first advice. The second advice is don't underestimate the power of the entrenched EMRs, that the Epic and everybody else, as we talked about earlier. And that, just having a new solution isn't necessarily a new solution given the nature of the buying patterns of healthcare professionals. Mm-hmm. And so, just a lot of people underestimate the clout, the reluctance, and they really have the data, and that people just don't change, and that Advocate Hospital in Chicago has Cerner, and they're working with Cerner, and it's a multi-million-dollar contract. They have a really strong relationship, and that just because you think you have a new software, you're going to displace it, isn't going to happen. Mm.